Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It is so fabulous to be with you on the Shabbat of Thanksgiving and the Shabbat of Erev Hanukkah. We have such an important thing to talk about today because it's really important and it's really relevant directly to all of our lives, 100% of our lives. We want gratitude. That's what Thanksgiving is about. But this thing will get in the way of our gratitude. And we want warmth and light and radiance and happiness and home and hearth. And this will directly contravene all of that. What I'm talking about is self-destruction. What I'm talking about is our being our own worst enemy, shooting ourselves in the foot, making mistaken decisions that leave lasting regret. It's not a lovely topic, but it's a crucial topic, and the address for it is our reading this morning, Genesis 37. And we're going to look at why is it that Jacob causes Jacob's deep and abiding pain? Why is it that Joseph causes Joseph's deep and abiding pain? And what can we learn from our Torah this morning so that we do not become our own worst enemies, and so that Thanksgiving can be filled with gratitude, and so that Hanukkah can be filled with light? So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu, u'lefi amcha beit Yisrael. V'nihya anachnu v'tzatza'einu v'tzatza'ei amcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hamalamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So I want to begin in our portion today with the end of the story and then read it backwards, which is Jacob is utterly unable to have Thanksgiving. And Jacob is utterly unable to light a Hanukkah candle and have any joy because his sons bring him the Ketonet Pasim, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, dipped in blood, and they say, "We found this, please examine it. Is it your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "My son's tunic, a savage beast devoured him." Joseph was torn by a beast. Jacob rent his clothes, that's mourning, put sackcloth on his loins, that's mourning, observed mourning for his son many days. All his sons and daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, saying, "No, I will go down mourning to my son in Sheol." Thus his father bewailed him. So the end of the story is that Jacob is his own worst enemy. And what I want to do is, now that we know how it ends, and of course we know how it ends, but every year we re-encounter this story, I want to ask the question, why questions are usually not very helpful, because there's usually not a great answer to why questions, other than we're human and flawed. That said, I want to ask the question, why does Jacob do this dumb thing, self-destructive thing, and what can we learn from it? So just take a look at the portion on page 226, and you see that Jacob does three things just in this reading alone, the Rishon Aliyah, that is just self-destructive. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a keeper to the sons of his father's wife, Bilhah and Zilpah, and Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. That is, there's this unwell dynamic, this sick dynamic, this disloyal dynamic of Joseph bringing bad reports. "Dad, can you believe what Naphtali and what God and Asher are doing? Can you believe what Dan and Naphtali are doing? Oh my God, you can't believe what your sons are doing, Dad."
Yeah, then what are you doing?
And right, and Jacob not only doesn't shut it down, but we know in the end that he's going to ask him to do it. In fact, that's going to be the prompt which causes Joseph to be vulnerable to his brothers when he goes to to Shechem and then to Dotan. So that's the first thing he does. Let me pause. There's obviously two others which we'll take in turn. But why does Jacob create a dynamic where he sets one son up against other sons. He is his own worst enemy. Why and what do we learn from that? Dear colleagues.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that, for obvious reasons, Joseph was the one he preferred because he was the son of Rachel. And clearly, among all the 4 wives he had, he only loved one, which was Rachel. All right, so he was the special one. And he wanted to protect him and give him everything he could and to make sure that he felt special. And that's terrible parenting, okay? But obviously, it's something that he did because he couldn't control it. You know, to what extent he did it maliciously to say, I'm going to get to all of this, to all of these sons that I have because I hate them because they come from unloved wives, or he couldn't help himself.
So can I just engage that before we open up? You made the important point that he couldn't help himself. You know, his heart felt what it felt, right? He loved Rachel. He just did, right? I fell in love with Rachel. He just did. And because Rachel struggled and finally was able to have Joseph, and because he loved Rachel, he just loved Joseph more. Okay. Now, you said he can't control that. But let's just talk about that. If you were Jacob's therapist, or if you were Jacob's clergy person, you were Jacob's rabbi or cantor, and Jacob comes to you and says, you know, I got this problem. I just, you know, I'm in love with Rachel. The other wives are okay, but Rachel is the one. And consequently, I just love Joseph at a different level. I can't help it. That's just how I feel. How would you advise Jacob? Would you just buy it? And he says, I can't control myself. You know, cantor, I can't control myself. Therapist, I can't control myself. What would you say?
So I actually think there's a slightly different dynamic going on, because although we know from the rest of the story that there's definitely the I love Rachel more dynamic going on, the text itself says Ben Skunav, which is that he is the child of his old age. And there is, I think, a really important flag there, that it's not just about I loved this other wife and therefore I love Joseph, but there's something about parenting when you've already parented a bunch of children that you have more tolerance. So I'm not sure about the premise that you're setting forth, that this is Jacob just getting in his own way. It feels to me much more like Jacob is much more in a grandparent mode than in a parent mode, because Joseph actually starts this. Joseph brings the reports. He's a little young man who doesn't, who loves the attention like any child does. And Jacob is relating to him much more like a grandparent would than like a parent would.
Time out.
Sets
Joseph
up this
is
bad dynamic.
Joseph is 17. He's a kid.
No, but it said
And
that
he's
it
a
started
teenager,
when
Michelle,
he
he's a
started
teenager.
when he
And
was young.
Jacob is the responsible adult, right? Who's the responsible adult in the room? So let's go with it and say that it's Joseph's bad idea to spy on his brothers. It's Jacob's role as the adult in the
Of
room
course.
to say, hey, time out. This does not
Michelle,
work.
And
for
you
us.
do that with your
How do you explain
first-
the color code?
Right, but wait, hold on a sec. And you do, guys, you do that with your first, and you do that with your second, and maybe you even do it with your third and onward. And there's something about this younger child that Jacob perhaps may have just more sense of distance, of time, of like, oh, isn't that cute? He's spying on his brothers, versus this is untenable and intolerable.
I think you are,
How many grandparents?
As always, Michelle, we love you because you are Mother Teresa and you sugarcoat a lot of stuff.
No, I'm not
Right.
sugarcoating. How many grandparents
Right.
give the kid
I respect
candies?
I respect your vision of this, but I don't agree with you.
But
I
he-
think
He's not attuned to the dangers and to the issues, because in some ways he's a little more distant from it than he was when it was his first children.
So the lens that I'm trying to bring to this text is what do we learn from this train wreck? What do we learn from this disaster? So, Elias, I want to just go with yours, and Michelle, I'll come to your explanation as well. But it says, the text continues, now Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, right? Yisrael ahavet Yosef mikol banav. And then it says because he was the child of old age or for whatever reason. And then it says, and he had made him an ornamented tunic, the ketonet pasim, which of course is used to persuade Jacob that Joseph is dead. Now here, this is just so important. I want to double click here. He has a feeling. Now the Torah is using language of emotion and the language of feeling. Now Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons. It's an emotion. It's a feeling. And the question is, what does a responsible adult do when they feel a feeling that is bad for their ecosystem? That's the double click question here, right? I feel a feeling. I can't deny the feeling. Like my heart, pitter patter, pitter patter. But if adults in my ecosystem knew it, it would be really bad. And what does Jacob do? He actually gives full expression to his feeling in a florid, flamboyant way. The coat of many colors, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the Katana Pasim. And so I guess my question to you is, how else could Jacob have handled this feeling? And had you been, Michelle, had you been his rabbi, Elias, had you been his chazan, and Jacob came to you and said, you know, Elias, I just love Joseph more. It's Hanukkah. I want to give him, I'm going to give all the other kids, you know, $10, but I'm going to give Joseph this coat of many colors. What would you advise him?
Well, perhaps Michelle could respond more to this. She has 4 kids. I have 2. Anyways, no, I would obviously advise him not to do that because we have to love. All of our kids deserve our love in equal portions in a way.
But
it's it's easy
Jacob,
to say it. It's
but I
easy
can't.
to say it.
I just don't feel it for God and
Make an
Don.
effort. Make an effort.
Yeah, I can't. Now, what if at the end of our dialogue, I say to you, you know, Don and Naphtali and God and Asher, they're okay. They're just okay. But Joseph, I have eyes for Joseph. What would you tell me at the end? At the end of that dialogue, and I tell you, you tell me you should love them all equally. And I say, I get that, but I can't. I don't. I won't. And then I say, my heart feels what it feels. Michelle, what would you tell Jacob? My heart feels what it feels. What would you tell him?
So I'm a big proponent of seeing each child for who they are and for what they need. And that might sometimes mean that one child gets a ketonet pasim and the other child gets something else. But Jacob's issue is that he doesn't make the effort to figure out what the something else is for the other children.
Right. So you would encourage him to find the ketonet pasim thing for all the others.
What's Dan's ketonet pasim?
What's Dan's ketonet pasim? Speaking of Dan?
So
Yes.
I think that part of this question is knowing who Yaakov is, right? Because you can say, okay, this is the responsible adult, but this is Yaakov, right? This is Yisrael. This is the guy who has so much complexity to his life that he doesn't see things straight. So it maybe one of these questions where you really can't answer the question. You can say on a macro level, what should an adult do? But it's not an adult. It's Yaakov, and Yaakov's whole life has been undermining and deceit, and that really hasn't changed.
So I want to bring in the voice of Eliza Berger. Eliza's in Denver with her family for the holiday, but I know that if she were here, she would say the following thing, because she always talks about generational trauma. So I want to point out the following, which is Jacob is revisiting on his family what was visited on him. And the Torah and the Midrash makes this clear, right? Because Jacob's family of origin, that is Jacob and Esau and his parents Isaac and Rebekah, that family is exploded and it's destroyed by what? By his mother's parental favoritism, right? She liked Jacob more, and as a result, she came up with this whole horrible idea in Genesis 27, and as a result, the family's exploded, and as a result, Jacob has to leave home, and he's gone for how long, according to the Midrash? 20 years, done by a favoring parent. Now, roll the film forward. Jacob is the favoring parent. He's like his mother, Rebekah. He visits the same trauma. He favors Joseph, and as a result, the brothers hate him, and as a result, he's separated from his family for how long? According to the Midrash, 20 years. So the Midrash makes it clear that what happened to Jacob, Jacob now visits upon his son, and parental favoritism exploding a family and causing real distance in geography and time is paralleled by parental favoritism exploding a family, causing real distance in geography and time. And I guess my question is, what do you do with that? Because you're talking about the character of Jacob, and it does feel like if we want to do a real deep dive on Jacob, we have to talk about how his youth disserved his ability to function as an adult father.
Yes, that's a great point, Wes. One little silly vignette. For many years, I would be at home and I would take a banana. I would peel the banana, go to the sink, and eat the banana looking at the window, looking at the trees and stuff like that. And then one day, Lorena comes and says, "Why do we always do that? Why do you always do that? Why don't you eat like sitting down or watching TV or something? Why do you eat the banana on the sink looking at the window?" And I said, "I don't know." And then I started looking back and back and back. My dad used to do that. My dad used to eat the banana looking at the window outside. And obviously, I've seen that so many times that I incorporated that as one of my ways of doing it. And this silly vignette relates exactly to what you are saying. What we learn at home, many times we do it afterwards in our lives as an adults, not necessarily thinking. It comes, automatically for us. So that idea that, he was coming from a troubled family, deceiving and all that stuff, and favoritism of his mom, does the same. He reenacts the same thing.
Right.
So, you mentioned, if you are a psychologist, perhaps he never had a psychologist, a shrink in those days, but the shrink would have told him, this is your behavior. This is what you do. Why do you do this? Because your mom did that. So now we have to separate that from yourself and, learn ways of coping with that.
Right. In other words, to identify patterns
Right.
that we grew up with that don't serve us as adults. And I think that's one of the learnings here, because this is a pattern he grew up with, doesn't serve him as an adult, and the question is, how can we interrupt that pattern? I want to just bring the Jacob piece of this to the end of the story. We'll come to Joseph in a minute with his dreams, but at the very end, after Joseph shares his second dream that you're all going to bow down to me. So Jacob says, "What," he said to him, "is this dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground?" So his brothers were wrought up at him, and his father kept the matter in mind. Va'aviv shamar et hadavar. Remember that one. And then, one time when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "I am ready." And he said to him, "Go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring me back word." So he sent him from the valley to Hebron, and the rest is history. But in other words, after this second dream, Jacob sends Joseph into the lion's den. So first of all, we have the history of bringing back bad reports, just this dynamic of disloyalty. He doesn't check it. He gives his son this florid, flamboyant token of favoritism. He doesn't check it. He hears these dreams about dominion, and he then sends Joseph to spy on his brothers again, leading to the downfall. And my question again is, what do we learn from Jacob's kind of utter inability? This is being his own worst enemy. How do we not do that? How do we learn from this so that it's not just an aliyah that we read on Shabbos, but it's a cautionary note that we don't make this mistake in our own lives?
So I think there's some level at which it's always worked out okay before, right? Whatever the toxic dynamics, whatever the issues, everybody's been kind of managing it at a low level boil. And Jacob doesn't realize in this moment that it's pushed too far. And I think that's a really important warning for all of us in our lives. Sometimes we do something again and again and again, all in the same way, expecting that the system can tolerate it and can be okay with it. And it seems to take Jacob by surprise. and the collapse of the ways in which we are able to think about comfort and safety and things are just going to go okay. Like, you know, that family member who you have at your Thanksgiving dinner who you're at complete odds with, but you know, you always just talk about the weather and make things go okay, and you think, all right, this going to continue just to go this way, we can get through this moment, and then we'll spend another year, and next year we'll check back in. And you never know when that actually stops working for you.
So, Michelle, what's your read about this phrase? I've always wondered about it. When Joseph shares his second dream of dominion, you're all going to bow down to me, and the sun and the stars too. Jacob rebukes him, and then Jacob, it says, his brothers were wrought up at him, Aviv shamar et hadavar. Jacob kept the thing in mind.
To me,
what does that mean?
Yeah, to me, that's that sense of like, he kind of has a sense that okay, that this isn't perfect here, and yet he has this own sense of safety or trust in the people around the table that they're going to be able to keep themselves in check.
So, in other words, this is even a little bit scarier because he's aware that there's a problem, but he's laboring under the illusion that we can keep this on a low simmer, on a low boil the entire time, and he just doesn't see the apocalypse.
Right. It just makes it worse because he clearly recognizes that there's something going on, and yet his next action is to do something that's going to actually
and you
cause
know
the
what?
fire.
We haven't even touched it, and I'm sure you will want to go there. But why did Joseph do that?
Right, we're going to get to Joseph in a minute. We'll definitely get to Joseph. But before we leave Jacob, I guess we'll get to Joseph in a minute. Before we leave Jacob, is Jacob's dilemma here real and relatable? I mean, do you see versions of Jacob, either in the context of favoritism that explodes a family, or in the context of not reading the tea leaves well enough that has disastrous consequences? And what is it that we learn from this before we get to Joseph?
Yeah,
Dan?
Absolutely, it happens in every family, and that this Michelle, you're saying that there's always that one family member that you have to just kind of put up with, but the idea that
I don't have any of those,
Uh,
just so you know.
okay, I know I'm none of those, yes, yeah, but I mean it's just the idea that that it does happen all the time, and that you can look at almost any family and see this exact dynamic where there are people that are just totally oblivious to what's going on, or they know what's going on and ignore it to the extent that it just causes total collapse. And I think it happens almost in every family, to some extent, and and even within communities where there's where people know that there's an issue within a community, and they know that there's a problem that needs to be solved and needs to be addressed, and there's a broom and a rug, and it just and all the stuff gets swept underneath.
So, Elias.
No, to me, there are a couple of things that we can learn from the story. The first one is that, to me, it's very clear that to fix something, it's easy. To realize that you are doing something wrong, that's the main problem here. Because sometimes we do things out of love or our how we feel in our hearts, but we don't realize that. So once we know that we are doing something bad, most of us can change that behavior. But realizing what's going on and how we are doing or what we are doing, it's different. Now, in the case of Jacob, I wouldn't be so sure that this is the case of him. Knowing his life path and his, what Dan said, he's Jacob, very complex man, and with many cases in his life that he didn't act in a good way.
So I want to just bring into the conversation something that's kind of a modern concept, but I think Genesis 37 is the address for it, which is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, as you may know if you've done any reading in this field, is the single greatest driver of a person's ability to fulfill their dreams. whatever goals and dreams a person has, whatever aspirations a person has, the single biggest driver, will they be able to realize those dreams, is emotional intelligence. Much more than where you went to college, much more than IQ, much more than physical appearance or wealth. All that other stuff is important, but emotional intelligence is the most important because it allows you to work well with people. And if you don't work well with people, whatever school you went to and however tall or short or athletic or not athletic or rich or poor, if you don't work well with people, you don't work well with people. And so emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is, I am aware, it's all about a lot about intentionality. I'm aware of the ecosystem that I'm in. I'm aware that what I say and what I do has an impact on the ecosystem, how people feel about themselves, how people feel about the group, and how people feel about me. And I'm aware, and before I say it or before I do it, I think, how is this going to play with the people I care about? And I can check myself if it's going to go badly. So I think Jacob is pretty utterly lacking in emotional intelligence, because if you do that, like he does the question, well, my sons think I favor Joseph anyway. So if I give him an amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and don't give them something, how will that make them feel? Pretty bad, and therefore I'm not going to do that. So the ability to know that what you say, what you do has an impact, and the ability to check yourself. I just think if you learn nothing else from Genesis 37, if you learn nothing else from the Joseph story, but the need for emotional intelligence, to be aware that every one of us operates in an ecosystem of friends and family, and what we say, what we do has an impact on that whole ecosystem, and it's just so important to check ourselves so that we don't add negative energy to that ecosystem.
I think I was just thinking about this. I think the worst part is that that without this narrative, the story of the Jewish people doesn't exist. In other words, so God is really the driver of this, because since Joseph has to be sold and brought to the pit, and then and then rise up in Egypt and bring the family down and cause us to become slaves for 400 years,
Right.
and then bring us to Sinai and bring us to the Promised Land. He's the linchpin there.
So,
and this
Well,
is and
actually,
God
actually,
is-
it's not.
it's so
Actually,
bad.
it's not God. Basically, in this paragraph here on page, whatever page is actually that unknown man on the
Right.
field.
Oh, okay.
But it's-
Yeah, okay.
right,
This is
but
the same
it's-
guy who's wrestling with
Yeah.
Yaakov. I mean,
So let's talk about that in God's role versus human role, because I want to just now pivot to Joseph. Granted, he's 17; he's not a seasoned adult like his dad. But once Joseph had a dream in which he told his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright. Then your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf." His brothers answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. Now, I picked something up this week when I was at Minyan on Thursday, when we read the Torah, that I had never noticed before. It was a wordplay, and I just loved it. And I don't know why I never noticed it, but Joseph's name he's named, when Rachel names him, for the sense of more. Now I'll have another son. And so that's what it's I want more son. So when the text says that they hated him, it says Vayosifu od sno oto. The more is they hated him more. Vayosifu od. Yosifu comes from the same root as Joseph. And then when he dreams the second dream again, they again say the same thing, that they hate him, using the same root, Yosifu od. So Joseph is radiating all this negative energy. And then he dreams the second dream as well. So what do you want to say about Joseph as distinct from Jacob in being a source of all this negative energy? Vayosifu od.
Well, I mean, it's clearly, you mentioned before emotional intelligence. I mean, where is Joseph with this dream? It's like, imagine you dream something like this, and then you come on Shabbat morning and you say, hey guys, hey clergy team, I'm going to say this in front of the whole congregation. You are going to bow down to me.
Right.
I'm going to be much better than all of you five.
Right.
And I have all these witnesses here. And why would you do that?
Right.
Why
So-
would you do that?
Right. So it feels so obscene and so obscenely stupid. How would you answer your own question? Like, why does the Torah posit? It almost gives us a cartoonish figure, a buffoonish figure, of somebody who is just so clueless, cartoonish, buffoonish, clueless. Why give us that to launch the whole Exodus story?
Well, I think the answer is it partially to demonstrate Joseph's growth, because I think if you fast forward to when the brothers come back and they finally reconcile, when Joseph has had that role of being the second in command of Egypt, he has grown and changed, and at that point he does have EQ. That's
So it's
one
he
possibility.
starts low so that he can grow.
Right.
Right.
Which is the message of the
trajectory
Jewish
of his
people.
life is way better than Jacob. I mean, in terms of self-awareness. For example, years later, he tells the story about Potiphar's wife, and he says no, because he says Potiphar is giving me all this and all that. The thing that at least the only thing that I can do to him is being loyal to him. So he refuses to lie down with his wife. So
Right.
that speaks very highly about him. So he's changing as a
So
man.
it's a growth story. Michelle, what's your read?
I 100% concur that this is a trajectory of Joseph's life, and it's a fulfillment of the prophecy. In a sense, the Torah has to articulate these dreams because later we see the dreams come true, and it actually does matter. But Joseph has to be ready for it, and I agree with both of you that this movement is really critical not only for Joseph but for our whole Jewish people. If we had stopped with Jacob, all we have is that repetition of, I'm going to favor the younger over the older. I'm going to continue to play out these stories that have repeated. It's with Joseph that we really break the chain, and Joseph's children.
And also you see here clearly in the story that he has a gift, all right? And sometimes it's very hard for people who are really naturally gifted to check themselves, especially when they are very mature. This sense of you have to put them down to earth, saying you're not better than anybody else. You just have a gift.
Right. So I wanna go back to Dan's point about this was what we needed to get down to Egypt so that God's promise would be delivered. And at the end of the story, Joseph himself says, you brothers sold me into slavery, but that God sent me here to preserve life. And I want to talk about for a second what proportion of this is God's plan versus human stupidity. The consequences of this are really severe for Jacob. He mourns his son, and for Joseph, who is without his father. And what you have, and it's just interesting that the operating thesis that we always say, and the end of the Genesis story is always, it was God who organized this. This is part of God's plan. But what does it mean that what powered God's plan was a complete and utter lack of emotional intelligence? That what powered God's plan was Jacob's obscene favoritism. What powered God's plan was Joseph's obscene egoism. What powered God's plan was that both father and son between them did not have a thimbleful of emotional intelligence. And as a result of all of those dreadful mistakes, which caused enormous pain to Jacob and presumably also Joseph, but certainly the text is explicit with Jacob, that's what eventuates in this Egypt story. So Dan, you brought it up, how do you intersect human finitude and human frailty and human vulnerability and human stupidity with divine master plan?
That's a really good question. I was thinking about a meta perspective also. Again, where this really goes back to Avram, to Avraham. Think about his relationships and how that didn't work out. And so this whole trajectory in the Torah starts with a family that continually creates underdogs, and creates through bad behavior, but creates underdogs, and then I guess the idea is that the trajectory is that we're going to get to the promised land because we as a people are underdogs, and that doesn't really answer your question.
Well, what I
but,
hear you
yeah.
saying, maybe tell me if I'm reading too much into what you're saying, that that one of the narratives of the Torah, one of the meta lessons, to use your phrase, is that even our worst mistakes are redeemable. Because here you have Jacob's terrible mistake of favoritism, and you have Joseph's terrible mistake of egoism, and you have father and son's terrible mistake of lack of emotional intelligence. They don't regard the other brothers. That's bad, right? That's serious. You wouldn't want a brother like that. You wouldn't want a father like that. And yet, from those mistakes, what eventuates is a great redemption. And so, are you saying that the Torah here is saying that every mistake can somehow be put to good use, and we can redeem our worst moments? Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah, yes, and also when you think about that redemption perspective, it's that in some way there's a redemption for each one of the characters. It's 20 years, it's 20 years, it's 20 years. Generations, but at some point, eventually, there's a reconciliation. So perhaps that's one of the questions that's being
Michelle
brought
and
to-
Elias, do you buy that? I want to come back. You're both, Rabbi Kenner. You think about God and humans. How do you square the divine gift wrap at the end of Genesis with the human stupidity inside the box?
I thought we don't talk about God in this class.
No, we talk about God a lot in this class.
Okay, so we've been taking a look at these characters in the Torah in a rational way, not necessarily in a God way of. We are analyzing them as we analyze ourselves as human beings. Okay, so to me, I don't know, I'm a little skeptical to think that this was all God's master plan. It's a little hard for me to see it.
Do you believe that God has a plan for you, Elias? Do you think that your trajectory from Buenos Aires to Newton was part of a divine master plan, or do you think that such a plan does not exist and this was just a human thing?
I don't know, whatever I'm going to answer, I'm going to get into trouble with that. But
No, just answer the truth from your heart.
I don't know. It's a question that we all wrestle with. We are Israel. We wrestle with God, and I don't know if it's call it a master plan. This is the trajectory of my life. Clearly, I was behind all of these decisions. It's
Right.
not that I say, "Hey, God, what should I do?" and God answer me. It's like, in a way, I don't know. You have to believe. I mean, how do we believe that? We believe that when things turn out to be good, that it was God's masterful plan. But what if things didn't work out well?
Let me
Is
ask
that
you-
God's master plan?
Elias, let me ask you this question. The statement that God has a plan for me, is that Christian only, or is that Christian and Jewish as well?
Do you believe in that?
I do. I do believe that God has a plan for me. I do. And I think that that's the entire point of the Joseph story. And what's just striking is that the ingredients, imagine you're making a cake out of the worst ingredients. So here you have a plan that's made out of egoism and arrogance and lack of emotional intelligence and favoritism and all the different sins that go into the famous Genesis narratives. And from all that recipe comes out God's providential plan that Joseph is going to be in the position to save the Jewish people during a time of famine. I can't say it's an easy thing, but I know, and I've spoken to Christian colleagues. If you ever talk to Christian colleagues about their life story, many of them share a story of call, that they were called and they believe they're here for a plan, and they're living out God's plan, and it's beautiful and powerful. And one might think that's a Christian move, that's not a Jewish move, but Joseph is a Jewish character. He's an Israelite, and it seems to be that's a big part of his story, which is God has a plan for me, and despite all the dumb things I did as a 17-year-old, and despite the ways in which my father wasn't helpful in promoting the kind of culture of family that would be better to have, still in all, in the end, there's this plan.
Yeah,
Michelle,
can I say something to that?
Yeah.
I think that is, you're talking about destiny, and you're talking about, ultimately what God has prepared for us. Think about the following. I was as all of you know, I was in Buenos Aires visiting my mom, and I came back, and people asked me, how was your trip? And I would say this and this, but at the end, I would normally answer, everything went well, thank God. Okay? But if everything didn't go well, do I say thank God, or do I say this was the plan that God had for me? No. So a simplistic way of saying is when things go well, we tend to say, thank God, everything went well. All right? But do we think really about that? Do we think about was really God in the way getting everything well? What happened if it didn't go well? Would I say, oh, it didn't go well, I don't know why God prepared this for me? No, that's how we talk.
Yeah, but I actually think that's part of the other piece of Joseph's story, that actually when Joseph goes and he's sold and he goes into prison, right? It's not only the good things that are part of God's plan here. Part of shaping Joseph into the person that he needs to be are that horrible experience of not knowing whether he'll live or die when he's in jail, of being forgotten. That is what helps refine Joseph's character, and in many ways, I think that's, at least to me, it's profoundly comforting to be able to think that those times when I feel like I'm off my path, or like I have been, not to sound too Christian here, abandoned by God, are perhaps moments when I'm being forged into the person that I need to be.
Yeah, but I need to tap on that, because you just said that. You said that when we think about good things to happen to us, thank God for that. When we think about that we are currently living something not good, we say God abandoned us. We don't say this is what God prepared for us.
No, but that's exactly it. That's the flip, right? When we feel that we are alone and not being attended to, that perhaps there is some way in which this piece of my trial is shaping me into the person I need to become in order to answer the next step on my trial to help somebody else, perhaps.
By the way, the claim, Lama Azaftani, why did you abandon me, God? That's in the Psalms. That's actually Jewish God language. Why did you abandon me, God, is God language. Michelle, I want to ask you, are you personally, well, two questions. First, do you think providential plan, God has a plan for me, do you think that is a Jewish concept too, not just a Christian concept? And are you personally comfortable thinking in those terms?
I mean, I think it obviously comes through this story right here. Really, all of our stories that we have in the Torah, but this one most especially and most powerfully speaks to the idea that our trajectories are not our own trajectories. We are here for something, and really our life journey is about trying to figure out how to work in ways that amplify God in this world, even when and if we go through trial and suffering.
Well, so here's what I want to say, Erev Hanukkah, is I think that this story should inspire our trajectory towards greater emotional intelligence, to be intentional about the fact that we are in relationship. All of life is relationship. To be intentional about the fact that what we say and what we do has a huge impact on the relationships in our ecosystem, and how the issue isn't that we feel what we feel. The issue is, can we check what we do about how we feel. And Jacob wasn't able to check. Joseph wasn't able to check. Hopefully, because of Jacob and Joseph, we will do better, and then we'll be able to light that candle tomorrow night, full of light and gratitude. Shabbat Shalom.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom.